So that the people would remember their connection to God throughout their history, God instituted through Moses the weekly feast of the Sabbath and several annual feasts, which included 3 pilgrim feasts, all prescribed in Leviticus. Today we celebrate the last feast of the Jewish liturgical calendar, a pilgrimage feast called the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Shelters or Tabernacles, or the Feast of Ingathering. In Hebrew, the Feast of Sukkot. This feast was celebrated for 7 days in the fall, 5 days after the Feast of Yom Kippur, or the Feast of Atonement. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the sons of Israel, on the 15th day of this 7th month is the Feast of Booths for 7 days." The Feast of Booths was historically recalling the booths or shelters the people lived in during the time of the Exodus experience and the protection of God. In addition, this feast coincided with harvest time, occurring at a time of harvest of the grapes and the olives. The feast thanked God for the productivity of the land. The actual feast lasted 7 days with a sacred assembly on the 8th day. On the first day, a holy convocation was held. The children of Israel were to do no laborious work of any kind. They were to gather for themselves the foliage of beautiful trees, palm branches, and boughs, and rejoice before the Lord. Each day of the feast, sacrifices and offerings by fire were made to God. This was in addition to the 2 lambs of daily sacrifice. By the end of the 7th day of the feast, 70 bulls had been offered to God, 14 rams, 98 lambs, not counting the twice daily lambs, 7 goats, cereal offerings, water and wine libations. On the 8th day, the children of Israel were to have a holy convocation assembly again and present a special offering by fire to the Lord. Again, there was no laborious work on the 8th day. 1 bull, 1 ram, 7 lambs, and 1 goat, along with cereal offerings, wine libations, were given in sacrifice on that day. As a part of the feast, the nation was to leave their permanent dwellings and live in booths or tents for 7 days, remembering the time when the children of Israel were homeless, wandering in the desert, living in tents. The faithful were required to live in the booth, sukkah, for the first 7 days of the festival, and were required to eat at least 14 meals in the tent. This was even more of a sacrifice because the feast occurred at the beginning of the rainy season. Because of these traditions, younger generations would know that God had the sons of Israel live in booths when he brought them out of the land of Egypt and protected them. Why is this lesson, or these feasts, or these celebrations of Jewish history, why are they important to 21st century Christians? The fact is that each of us comes with a story of God's hands in our lives. But memories fade, and blessings that once loomed so bright dim with each year, with each passing generation. The miracles of how we got over, the stories of victory in the face of odds insurmountable, the tales of selfless courage in the midst of selfish scorn, will soon be lost if we do not set a time to retell and celebrate God's bounty. As I read this lesson in the context of the last Sunday in Black History Month, there's a reason why God wanted us to remember his hand in our lives. In the Feast of Sukkot, Israel reenacted their history to remember God's protection and to thank him for his blessings. There is a connection that comes with reenacting, rewalking the steps of our ancestors in light of the hand of God. Years ago, I went to Elmina Castle in Ghana, West Africa. This massive edifice was a building used to store people labeled as slaves before they were sent to the Americas to work and die far away from home. The guide told us of how, on the very floor we stood, men and women, our ancestors, were crowded into dark, hot, dirty rooms, the air filled with the smell of human excrement, the stone walls echoing the cries of people in fear, in pain, in prayer. They laid on these filthy floors in chains. Men, women, children piled on each other for several weeks before the ships would come to take them away. And when it docked at the door, this mass of humanity would individually walk through a door just large enough for one weak person to squeeze through without being able to maneuver, without being able to resist. This was the last time their feet would ever touch African soil. As we walked down the narrow hall to the door, we began in a small way to reenact the journey of ancestors with names long lost and a history unkept. I saw tears welling in the eyes of my students. The only sound was their footsteps hitting the stone floor as we walked closer to the door, a door some tiny part of each of us had walked through almost 400 years before. With sweat pouring and our hearts pounding, we could not help but thank God that we had made it over. Reliving our history helps us to appreciate a God of miracles. That's the lesson for this week. Have a great day. Bye.